All right, let's talk about Gotti. Some 7 years in the making, I believe, from the time you first got interested in this project, John.
Yes. And the only good news about that is that if you recall, as you know better than anybody,
Hmm.
certain movies that ended up to be great movies, like Forrest Gump or um, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest,
Hmm.
took anywhere from 10 to 15 years to get going. So, relativity wise, seven isn't too bad. But in this day and age of movies about whether it be human stories or
Hmm.
historical stories, they're very difficult to get made. So you have to work overtime to get them made. And I'm proud that not only did we get it made, but we got it released properly in theaters. Because it can go very many different ways nowadays.
Well, you were the only constant, I think, throughout this whole project. There were different
Yes.
directors attached, different cast members that at one point were going
Oh,
to do it. But why did
yes.
you just? I mean, why did you stick through it all this way? Where there had to be a point where you're thinking, like, you know what, I can just move on to something else. Maybe this will come back around sometime.
It's a really good question why I stayed with it because there were so many invitations
Hmm.
to say goodbye to it. But there was something about the Gotti family energy that was so deeply flattering and consistent about my doing it. They were just so utterly convinced that I was that I thought, you know, maybe they're onto something here. I should really
Hmm.
not only do my homework and research this more thoroughly, but maybe I should just stick it out because when I had lunch with John Jr.,
Hmm.
John Gotti Jr., uh, we had a script, but it was barely news that we were, going to do it.
Hmm.
Uh, 300 photographers showed up at the window of the luncheon restaurant that we went to, and I thought there's an interest in this. They liked the idea of John Jr. and I being together. Why did they like what is
Hmm.
going on here? So I so deeply felt at that point that this was something worthy of sticking to and with, from
And
public interest and their family interest.
this is this material based on John's story in his book, right? John Jr.'s
Yes, John
story.
Jr. wrote
And
In the
was he
Shadow of My Father,
right?
and
Right.
this is a definitely a story based on that book.
And how active was he during the actual
Oh
filming
my
process? How
gosh,
involved was John
it,
Jr.?
it, he was there almost every day,
Mm.
John Jr., uh, with his own criteria of how things should be done, and it was a I liked it. It was pressure for sure
Hmm.
because how do you live up to what someone imagines their father was like,
Yeah.
or how a woman imagines her husband should be portrayed? Um, but you just do the best you can to assume that character's beingness to convince them at least, because I figured if John Jr. was convinced and Victoria was convinced, then I was in high cotton,
Yeah.
and that's what continued to happen. And they certainly fed good informed, let's say,
Hmm.
me well, and their personal footage of family footage. The online stuff in prison was empirical. I mean, it was so important to me
Hmm.
because it was verbatim what we used in the script. So that helped me tremendously. Uh, and they let us borrow the personal effects. I
Mm.
got to wear his coat. It still had the cologne from
Really?
when he wore it,
Yeah.
jewelry, handkerchiefs, uh, all those little bits, believe it or not, really contribute to the building of a character.
Sure.
My mother taught acting, and
Mm.
part of it was building a character, and you put layers.
Yeah.
And in one moment, you arrive when all your ingredients are
Mm.
there, and you kind of know when you have it. And all those little things help, believe it or not.
You find that groove. You find that
You
comfort
find that
zone. Yeah.
groove.
Yeah. It's
And
nice.
as we spoke of last night,
Mm.
the most important thing for me to find out, because the famous gangsters I knew, which was Capone and Dillinger,
Hmm.
in my memory, they were not well loved or liked. John Gotti was so well loved. I needed to find out why. I really needed to understand why he was so loved, because all I had seen growing up in the New York area was the cover of New York Post and Daily News, and he got off
Yeah.
from
Teflon Don.
Teflon Don and all that. But I didn't know the details of all this affection. So one of the most fascinating things I found was that although he took a percentage of people's business, these small businesses, if they ever dipped into the red, he would bring them not only into the black, but never let them close.
Right.
And that was really important. It was like an insurance policy for the communities. And in addition to that, he financed wonderful celebrations, 4th of July celebrations. He would if a family was in need of medical attention, he would take care of it, or he would even. And we do one scene where a boxer comes up and says he's quit boxing because a gym closed down. He reopened the gym for him, and anyone else who lost their interest in boxing because they didn't have a source. So these are some of the reasons people loved him. I also didn't know what a family man he was, how devoted he was to his children and to his wife. So that dichotomy, that duality, was very interesting to me and very important.
Yeah, that's the Shakespearean element, if you will, to this character, right?
Yes.
And as we talked about yesterday too, you have this family drama and domestic life of the Gotti family portrayed in the film, and then of course you've got the politicking and the murders and the ruthless part, which you get to play as well. And I'm sure as an actor, that's just a bounty of riches for you to tap into.
Well, it is because first of all, the moral code within the gangster group, the mafia in general, was you live by the sword, you die by the sword. And when you join that group, you understand it. You may die on the street or you may die in prison, but you don't accept the idea that you will not die by some